and welcome everyone to the Student Empowerment through SEL and Music Education webinar series. Thank you for being here for episode 5, Culturally Relevant Social Emotional Learning through Music Education. My name is Rebecca Hoff from Save the Music Foundation. Save the Music is proud to partner with the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning to produce this free webinar series. Lastly, this work was made possible through the support of KKR COVID Response Fund, a sponsored project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. We thank them for making this possible. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our facilitator for today's episode, Dr. Urel Lashley, Director of Student Empowerment for the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning. Urel.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, and welcome to everybody. Culture is what students and teachers bring with them into a classroom, who they are, how they live, what they experience, which informs their identity. Every student, teacher, and person has culture. That needs to be honored. Today, we are fortunate to have two powerful guests whose work, scholarship, and lives model lifelong learning and holistic, culturally sustaining education, as well as the centrality of music in support of learning, belonging, and empowerment for students. These are elements of social emotional learning. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings is Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor in Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and was faculty affiliate in the Departments of Educational Policy Studies, Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis, and Afro-American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's the current president of the National Academy of Education. She was the 2005 through 2006 president of the American Educational Research Association, and into 2021, she was named a corresponding fellow at the British Academy. She is a 2020-2021 Hagler Institute Fellow at Texas A&M University. She is a fellow in the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences. Ladson-Billings' research examines the pedagogical practices of teachers who are successful with African American students. She also investigates critical race theory applications to education. Franklin Willis, for more than a decade, has been an educator and leader. Franklin Willis has served the students and families of the Metro Nashville Public Schools community. As an elementary music coach, he equips teachers with instructional support and necessary resources to strengthen their professional acumen and enhance their classrooms. This includes shepherding colleagues and teachers through the realities students are faced with around equity, inclusion, and racism. Through his work, Willis has received national recognition for his commitment to student learning, his passion for the profession, and his innovative teaching practices. He is a 3-time recipient of the CMA, or the Country Music Awards Foundation Music Teacher of Excellence Award. Willis is a children's book author and graduate of the University of Memphis with a Bachelor of Music Education with an emphasis in choral music in 2009. In 2012, he earned the Master of Education degree in Nonprofit Leadership from Belmont University. So we asked both of our guests to share thoughts about the natural connections they see between music education, social and emotional development, and culturally relevant and culturally sustaining practices. More specifically, we asked how this work lives in their work and practice, and also what were some examples where they've seen it in this work. Without further ado, we welcome Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings to start us off. Dr. Ladson-Billings, welcome. Thank you so much for bringing your genius and wisdom here. And it's so nice to see you, Gloria. It's been a long time.
Thank you, Urel, and thank you all for having me here this evening. I'm delighted to be here. I was excited with the intro music, which is my favorite jazz pianist, Thelonious Monk, and I believe that was his famous "Well, You Needn't" song written back in the 40s and still today just resonates. Now I realize I have 10 minutes and I have my timer right beside me, so I'm going to try to make sure that these slides don't run too long. The only reason I have them is so that I don't ramble. So I've kind of titled these few slides I have, Keeping the Music Alive, Youth Culture, Music and Emotional Well-Being. So if you go to the very next slide, one of the things that I have here is this notion of culturally relevant pedagogy. And there's an image I'd like you to have in your mind, and that is of an equilateral triangle. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want you to get these terms so that you have an understanding of when someone says they're doing culturally relevant pedagogy, you need to understand that they are doing all three of these things. If they're not doing all three, then they're not doing culturally relevant pedagogy. They might be doing something else, but you need to do all three of these things, and they are equally important. So the first is this notion of academic achievement, or more specifically, student learning. I've modified it by saying student learning because a lot of times when you say academic achievement, people fixate on test performance. And that's not what I mean. Our students learn a lot more than we can ever test. So it could be learning to develop better work habits. It could be learning to get along with people better. It could be learning to manage one's emotions. All of that is a part of student learning. The next aspect of the work is probably the most misunderstood. And this is this term, cultural competence, because we think culture is that thing that other people have. I'm glad that Urel started out by saying we all have culture, because the truth of the matter is, even in a field that is as expansive and as understanding as music around culture, we say things like world music. Well, what music isn't world music? I mean, do we have music from other planets? So this idea that we bifurcate and say, oh, this is, quote, classical music, whenever anybody uses that term, I always say, what classical? Oh, European classical, fine. But every society has a classical music. There is Asian, there's Chinese classical, there is various African classicals, there are South African classicals. So the notion of cultural competence is that our students bring their cultures to the classroom with them. And our job is to help them to become facile in cultures beyond their own. So they should leave our classrooms with a wide range of cultural skills. And then the third part of culturally relevant pedagogy is perhaps the most ignored, the notion of socio-political or critical consciousness. It's what I often call the so what factor. We have students learn things and they say, well, why do we have to learn this? Why do I have to know this? It is the ability to put into practice the skills, the abilities, and the knowledge that you learn in schools to solve everyday problems. That's all it is. So those are the three. In a long workshop, I would go through lots of examples and things, but I just wanted to give you that as a beginning. If we head to the next slide, one of the things that I want to point out is that we forget that one of the cultures that young people are most engaged in is youth culture, that they themselves are culture-making folks. So the first point I'd like to make under this is that just ask the question, are we paying attention to the ways that youth create and practice art? Or do we think it's just our job to, quote, give them art, to give them music? Our young people come with these things. The next point I want to make here is to ask the question, is youth arts expression valued in school programs? In other words, a lot of times our curriculum had no space to include youth art and youth art expression. Don't bring that here. Don't include that. You know, one of the things that I always like to do in my classes is I like to create a playlist. I like the students to be hearing music as they come, and I don't teach a music class, but I know that music is a fundamental part of being human. The third point I want to make around arts and youth culture is to raise the question, what is the place of youth voice in your arts programs? When the adults are sitting around saying, this is what we're going to have, these are what the standards will be, these are what's required, do we hear our young people's voice? We're talking about their social emotional learning, and yet we don't include their voice. The very next slide speaks to the fact that there is art in the science and science in the art. I am so tired of hearing people bifurcate these things. So my first point about this issue is that the belief that art and science reside in different hemispheres of the brain is not substantiated. And we need to stop saying so-and-so is left brain, so-and-so is right brain. No, so-and-so has a brain. And that brain is very complex and integrated and pulls on all kinds of things. The next point about the art being in the science and the science in the art is that the students arrive at school with both scientific and artistic interest and ability. We don't have to give them these things. They already have them. We need to capitalize on them. And then the third point regarding art and the science and the art is that it is school that bifurcates those interests and those abilities and literally forces them to choose. You should go into art, or you need to make a choice between art and chemistry. No, you shouldn't have to do that. And I actually have some images there that are actually from science classes, but they're artistic images. The next slide speaks to the fact that students exhibit their science and their art all the time. And I have some examples. That young lady in the picture, the second picture, is one of the youngest DJs in the world. She is a Ghanaian award-winning DJ, 10 years old. You see examples of b-boying or b-girling, the dancing that is a part of the work. On the bottom picture, right above that picture, is the graffiti art, which is a part of even the clothes that our young people wear represent something. There's something about the ripped jeans that reflect the kind of fashion sense and artistic sensibility. Next slide, please. But what happens in schools is we reject their music, we police their bodies and their clothes, and we ban their technologies. And these technologies have been exactly what it has taken to bring our young people to the arts in a very different way. I think I'm at my last slide. Yes. So I want to just wrap up with the question, well, what could this all look like? So you're going to see a video that was done by a former student of mine that is now part of the PBS Wisconsin website on climate control. This is a young man who had an interest in the arts and an interest in the sciences. So if you run the video, you can get a view of his work.
Neighborhoods are ovens with windows. And as the knob on global warming increases, lives are preheated until a soul souffles. Pancake stack projects are poured over with a humid as thick as molasses. Heat and humidity are the perfect appetizer on death's plate. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet from May to October, and senior citizen discount is every day. If thermometers can measure temperatures, they should be able to measure human anxiety. As the temperature rises, we reach boiling points. Attitudes of those around us rise quicker than mercury, and the pressure of staying cool causes us to explode. Compressed living complexes circulate heat and cause compressed feelings to converge upon our neighbors in the hood. So that 90% release of excess body heat talked about in science class is contributed to our local temperature rising. We crack open fire hydrants until we hear lights crying, raising taxes by lowering our body temperature. And if you couldn't afford a wind replacer, fridges and freezers were propped open until your two brothers' faces are frozen. Audiences applaud the ice cream man once that familiar jingle mingles with our ears. This sweet release of flooded heat is a godsend. But what do you know? The ice cream vendor's name is Noah. As the temperature rises, so do attitudes, death rates, bills, and ice cream stocks. Heat affects the elderly more than it does us. Their lungs resemble the Dow Exchange, rises and drops until they crash. Ambulances are summoned, riding down the street flooded with the contents of the only fire hydrant. And we have only just begun to fry.
So I wanted to share that with you because here's a young man who is both interested in science and music. This video is about 8 years old. I had him as a freshman. Elijah is now a climate scientist. He earned a degree in environmental studies, but you can catch him on the weekend. He's still a performer. Let's stop making our kids choose when they are capable of doing each and every part of what it does, what it means indeed to be human, that the arts and the sciences need to be coming together. So thank you. I think I'm 1 minute over. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Thank you so much, Gloria. The video was amazing and an amazing exemplar. And we appreciate you really grounding the conversation on what culturally relevant teaching is, but also what it needs to be and really what it can look like. So now we're going to turn to Franklin Willis and have you share your wisdom and get your perspective on sort of what this work has been for you and what it looks like. Thank you so much.
Can we just drop the mic right there, though? You know what I'm saying? Like, wow. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, I could listen and learn from you forever and always. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and spirit with us tonight. Your research and knowledge has guided thousands of educators to think critically, teach with purpose, and reimagine the possibilities of education. I stumbled upon your research during an education class for my master's degree. At that time, I was a third-year middle school general music and choir teacher in Nashville, Tennessee. Although it was my third year of teaching, it was my first year being at a middle school. After the first day of teaching, I was terrified. I began to call everyone and tell everybody my sad sob stories to anyone who would listen. It went a little something like this, y'all. They put me in a portable with all these kids. I don't have a curriculum. I don't have any instruments. The AC don't work. These kids hate music. I could go on and on with all of the excuses as to why I was not being successful and it was not working. But through my studies, I came across a quote by Dr. Ladson-Billings that said, culturally relevant teaching is using your students' cultural heritage as intellectual capital and linking it to your instructional practice. Wow. I reflected on that quote. I did my paper. I turned it in for school. And maybe fast forward a few weeks later, I attended a school talent show. At that talent show, there were several students from my classes performing on the stage. They were rapping, they were singing, they were dancing, they were playing instruments, and there was even a comedic routine. I sat there stunned. And honestly, y'all, I was embarrassed because I could not see the brilliance of my kids. It was on full display for everyone. I thought to myself, could I be that blind to the talents and gifts of my students? So at that point, I knew I had to start over. I had to go back in and figure out how could I make this work? Here they are, having fun, singing, doing all of this stuff for the entire school. But in my classroom, I'm not having that success and that fun. I had to reimagine what teaching music would look like and also sound like. I had to process what would be success for my students. And so through that vulnerable process is when I began to incorporate the tenets of culturally relevant teaching. Student voice and choice had to be at the center of academic success. Would that look like someone else's school down the street? Maybe not. But I had to find out what it was that gave my students the passion and the urge to come to school and to learn in my classroom. Those culturally relevant teaching practices built a sustainable SEL model for me. At that time, I didn't know that that's what it was called. I didn't know it was called social and emotional learning, but now I know that's exactly what it was. Students were able to build relationship skills through group projects, songwriting units, conducting their own rehearsals without me being there, running sectionals. Students were showing that their thoughts and experiences on events that were happening in the world through journal exercises. What I found is through that journaling, some students don't want to share in front of everybody, but they'll share their thoughts with you. And so it gave me an opportunity to connect with my students on a much deeper level. Students began to tell their parents about what was happening in the music world, right? So all of these projects and ideas that we were doing in the music portable outside, they were then going home and sharing that with their parents. Then what I found is that the parents began to share what was happening in my music room with the community, right? And then the community began to offer support and resources for this music teacher and this music program that we had built. You know, as I think about it, it's really funny because here it was at the beginning of the year, I was saying all of the things that they couldn't do, but I wasn't thinking about the possibilities of the things that they could do. And so I challenge all of us who are teachers, administrators, instructional coaches, let's start figuring out what are the other possibilities. And so those same kids that I complained about were the same kids that went on to earn superior ratings at Coral State Festival 2 years later, that I was able to take around the city of Nashville performing and sharing their art and their music. Those were the same students that I said, wait a minute, they ain't got it. I can't do it, right? So that's just one example of how the intersection of culturally relevant teaching and SEL intersect to create a masterpiece. And Dr. Ladson-Billings hit on something about that third piece, that socio-political consciousness. And because of that work that I did with those students, the second year I was at that particular school, we got a new schedule. And in that schedule, they didn't have choir as a full rotation. They had it only as a 9 weeks. When those students found out about that, they wrote letters to principals. They got their parents up to the school. And so that is that consciousness of knowing, wait a minute, this is my art, this is what I love. And we were able to get that schedule changed because of the commitment and the advocacy of music education and being able to reach students right where they were. So I know we're going to get into a Q&A. That was my spiel. I wanted to share my culturally relevant exercises and things that I've used throughout the years to build relationships. And when we say build relationships, we're talking about authentic relationships, right? Where students can say, yo, what's up, Mr. Willis? And I know that in return means, hey, how are you doing? I've served in numerous types of schools where you want to welcome student voice and choice. So Uriel, you can pop back on. And I'm so full right now with Dr. Ladson-Billings. And I just got to plug the new book that she has out, which is a resource of all of the top hitters. And it just came out. I had to grab it. It's called Culturally Relevant Pedagogy, Asking a Different Question. And if we were in person, I would get it autographed.
and I would sign it for you. And I just, the plug I want to make on that book is that cover art is from one of my friends here in Madison, Jerry Jordan. And that teacher is an actual teacher who teaches in Milwaukee Public Schools. His name is Josh Jackson. So I was very happy to be able to use Jerry's art as my cover art.
All right. Thank you so much, Frank. That's amazing that Jerry, I didn't know Jerry had done that cover art. He's an amazing artist here locally in Madison, Wisconsin.
And another example of somebody who has a lot of different talent. Jerry is a in our School of Education, he's a counselor, for our student teachers, but he's also an artist.
Yeah. I've actually had the pleasure of going to several of his exhibits, and it is truly amazing work. Franklin, thank you so much for both bringing the centrality of student voice and choice into discussion and building so solidly through your examples on the foundation that we're so blessed to have from Gloria. You've both given us a ton to think about. At this moment, I want to just take one moment to acknowledge Dr. Scott Edgar, Kira Rizzuto, and Bob Morrison from the Center for Arts and Education and SEL team, and they're in the background helping with various things right now. And I want to remind folks to submit questions through the Q&A feature so that you can have your ideas addressed by our esteemed folks here today. So I also want to remind our guests, remind you, Gloria and Franklin, that I think a good portion of our audience is music educators. So I just want to lift that up and help as helpful context for the ideas and strategies and suggestions that you lovingly share as we continue to discuss. So I think the first question I'm gonna go back to Gloria on the idea of culture, because I know I tried to give a little tiny mini definition of culture, and Gloria, you gave a much more full definition or some ideas around culture, but I still think for a lot of educators it's a mysterious thing. I know that's why you're addressing it. And you said something once that I thought was really important. So the idea of cultural excavation, I've heard you talk about. And I'm wondering if you might just talk about what the idea of cultural excavation is, and then what that might look like in a music class where we're preparing young people for life, as you so eloquently put it earlier.
Oh, thank you. Excellent question. So, I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin. The majority of my students are of a European, German/Scandinavian descent. They are Wisconsinites because it's a state school, and they don't think they have a culture. They think that culture is that thing that other people have. And so I think my biggest task is not teaching them about Black culture or Hmong culture or Latinx culture. It's helping them discover their own culture. Because what they have done is placed their culture at the center, which we all do, but they think it's universal and it's the only one. So they might hear something by some Tibetan monks and say, that's not music. Yeah, it is. It's why people have listened to hip hop and say, that's not music. No, it is. It's not music that your culture celebrates or recognizes. And I think hip hop is an interesting one because really the major consumers of hip hop happen to be white. Black people could not sustain this industry for 40 years. First of all, because we don't buy the records, right? We get one CD and then we be burning it 15 times. But if you ride around the campus of the University of Wisconsin, which is a largely white campus, you're going to hear hip hop everywhere you go. So the excavation is really forcing them to go back, ask fundamental questions about why do I do what I do? Why do I think X is right and Y is wrong? What kind of choices, every single choice we make has some cultural underpinning. And that's the problem. We're trying to understand culture because it's everywhere at the same time. But the truth of the matter is all cultures are local, all of them. Then, just because a lot of people do them doesn't mean that makes them the culture. And one of the beauties of the arts and music in particular is that it will invite you into cultures. I learned more about Asian music listening to people like Alice Coltrane or Pharoah Sanders, who are African American, but they began pulling on these instruments, the sitar, or hearing someone like Hugh Masekela. I don't know anything about South African music, but that's the beauty of the arts, that you can begin to appreciate cultural forms and begin to see the continuity. I was listening to a interview, I think yesterday, with Brandy Carlisle. I'm not a, quote, country music aficionado, but I like a lot of country music because one of the things that it has in it is a sad story. You know, it's always about, you know, my dog died, my car broke down, my woman not left me. That story is a kind of story you can find in almost every culture. So when we begin to open up to the possibilities that people outside of ourselves can be right, or that they can be, you know, that we can appreciate, then our students are actually in a better place to understand what their students bring to the classroom.
Thank you. I can always depend on you for some new ideas, but also some new lovely quotes. All cultures are local. That's in the gym, and that the arts always invite you into culture is something, because as teaching artists, we always talk about what the arts inherently do, but the fact that that invitation is there to investigate different things is an amazing aspect and piece and element too. Thank you for that. So Franklin, I have an initial different question for you, but if you want to respond to that, we yield space for that as well.
Come on, bring your question, and I'm gonna throw some sauce on it.
All right.
Seasoning on it.
I can appreciate it. We're gonna do the gumbo way today. Okay, that works. So you are a children's book author. You wrote Edward's Rhythm Sticks, which even just the dedication sent me to my feelings because I got a son. But you wrote a children's book essentially to really talk about pathways through music that allow us to broaden how we see ourselves. And so I want to ask you, what are some ways we can use social and emotional learning skills, practice, really, which is what this is about, and culturally relevant ways to help students see and aspire to their musical potential, which I think is what you were getting at with the book.
Wow. Shout out, Uriel. I appreciate that question, man. The biggest part for me was during 2020, the pandemic, we're at home, we're in quarantine, and then we see this video of George Floyd, right? And it just, we've seen it before, but it just hit me in such a deep place, and I was in grief. I was depressed. And one of my good friends had to tell me, like, you need to go talk to somebody, Franklin. And in the midst of that therapy and understanding who I am as a Black man and as an educator, and understanding that I have this gorgeous child, this son who's brilliant and who's innocent and who has like all of these things that I want to see and see him achieve, I started thinking about, why do we wait on other people to create? Why do we wait on other folks to validate our experience, our music, our beliefs, our music? Like, why do we do that? And so I didn't set out to be a children's author. It happened naturally. My son had these rhythm sticks, and he would not put them down during the pandemic. And for my folks who've already heard this story, I apologize, but he would not put them down. He took them everywhere with him. And that love for music, and you turn some music on and you just want to groove, that's what that was about. And through that story, I've been able to work with so many teachers, not only across the country, but across the world, who have that identity, that identify with music making at its most simplest form, right? And I talk about this all the time, but during breakfast duty, everybody used to hate breakfast duty because you had to clean up the trays, you had to make sure the kids were quiet. But I had some folks in there that would. So I'll be in there jamming with them, pick up your tray and put it over there, pick up your back, like freestyling, having fun. And everybody wanted to come to breakfast then, right? And so it's using these things, and Dr. Billings said, Ladson-Billings said, she said, music is already, they're already experiencing, they're already doing it. But then we come in and adultify and say, wait a minute, that's not music. Well, how come? Why not? And so that same pencil tapping that you were doing in the cafeteria, bring that on into the music room. I can show you that's a quarter note, that's 2/8 notes and a quarter rest. But what we do as educators, we say, no, you gotta do it this way. And so for me, it's been, well, wait a minute, why do we have to do it that way? And I've gotten in trouble for that some places. Because some people are not ready. When Dr. Ladson-Billings said culture is local, it's the truth. I taught at a school. These two schools were about 5 miles away from each other. At one school, predominantly Black students, hip hop was the love of the school. I did Gloria by Common and John Legend. It was amazing. Fast forward to a new school 5 miles away. I tried to do Gloria with students. I had parents sending emails and calling folks and saying, he's trying to teach us and do all of this. And so when you challenge the status quo, expect that energy. Expect folks to pop up out of nowhere because you're teaching kids truth. You're giving them that cultural consciousness. You're asking them to ask questions about who am I and where do I find myself in the world? I'll never forget, and I'll stop here because MLK Day is next week. I wrote a song called I Have a Dream. It's a very simple melody. And I taught it to some first graders, second graders. And there's a wonderful video by Kid President on YouTube. He's grown up now, looks nothing like what he did when he was really, really popping. But his video is about 3 minutes long, and it talks about Dr. King, and it talks about why they killed Dr. King in kid language. And after that video, a first grader raises their hand and says, Mr. Willis, so what you're saying is if this was back then, you wouldn't be my teacher? That wouldn't be possible? And I had to look at her and tell her, you're absolutely right. And she said, I said, how does that make you feel? It makes me feel sad. But nobody is asking our kids or showing them that. And then that's why 20 years later, when you see a George Floyd situation happening, you have people like, this is the world we live in? Because we hide these facts and these truths from our children. So my thing is, I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to give you the opportunity to think. And then if you ask me a question, we're going to go deeper and we're going to do it through music, through history, through culture. So these are all of the things that we're talking about, that we're asking. And I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to get back to you, Uriel. Culture is not just Black folk, right? When I work at Belmont University and I'm preparing elementary music teachers to go out and teach. But what I found is when I put them into those situations to teach, that's your first experience being around Black folk. That's your first experience being around ELA students that speak another language, right? And so how can we get our teachers to get in more diverse settings? And that's just not a college problem. It's a education problem. And so I done went around the world and came back again, but Uriel, the idea is all of us have a voice, all of us have lived experiences, and it's up to us to share those lived experiences with our students, that they can then become productive and wonderful citizens that ask questions and don't just take the answers, right? And then I'm gonna stop right there.
Those last points are very much about critical social consciousness. Before we go further, I have a next question, and I'll loop back to some of the points you were making, but I just want to make space in case Gloria wants to say anything on the heels of what you've just shared.
No, that was great.
All right.
You could tell he's been around middle school kids because they'll make you crazy now. That's where I started. Woo! They make you crazy.
I did want to call out one of the points you made, Franklin, a few of them, but the first being, why do we wait on others to validate what we create? Like this, I was looking at the way we've been presenting these and realizing that we don't do the bios on the presenters, but I'll share quickly. One of the things I do is teach music through drumming to get toward youth leadership. And we start with some very just central questions and ways of being. And one of them is that what you create is valid because it's your creation. And so I like that you brought that piece into this. I think sometimes that can be complicated, especially for music educators. You get handed a curriculum and you feel like you got to check these boxes and do these things. But that was a powerful point. I think the examples you gave and the idea of making space to intentionally reveal truth, to not teach young people what to think, but to just push them to think for themselves. So all this you're pointing toward youth empowerment, which I think sort of leads us into the next question, which I want to ask of both of you, which is one of the approaches that we've been using to encourage educators to create spaces where students can explore and practice music and social emotional skills with fidelity has been to call for them to be, one, intentional, which means we're not saying, the arts just intuitively do these things. That they need to be intentional in the way that we call them out and explicit, so that we think of this idea of metacognition, which is a fancy word, right? Which just means that the students know what they're learning to be able to apply it in situations where they need to, which is not necessarily the classroom. In fact, it usually is not. That the classrooms are a preparation for other places, for life, so that we're intentional about making sure they understand the skills they're taking away. So, and then this next idea that they're embedded, that the stuff is integrated, like how life happens, right? We don't, as you were saying, Gloria, it's not about bifurcating and separating things, but acknowledging the reality in which they happen. And that's in an embedded way. So they need to be embedded in our teaching practices, and then that they're sustained, right? We're not talking about the one-off, people bring in some music they like, and we say we did culturally relevant teaching. That these are in all the work that we do. So my question is, can we think about culturally sustaining SEL as being intentional, embedded, and sustained? And how might folks make them that way? How would they create what are some ways to do that in a music education context? And I think you both hit on some of that already, but I think we're going to make it plain for folks now.
So I'll jump on that first. One of the things that we tend not to ask students is about their music biographies, right? That they don't come in tabula rasa, not having had any experience with music. We don't ask them questions about what are your first memories of music growing up. If you ask me that question, what you'd learn from me is that growing up in Philadelphia, one of my neighbors was a guy who used to go in, he'd play ball with my brother, my older brother, and then he said, I gotta go and practice, man. That was McCoy Tyner. Okay, so now I got John Coltrane, Miles Davis, pianist on this end. On the other end, a neighbor that backed up against me, who never really came out very much because he was constantly practicing, is Andre Watts. So here's part of my music biography, that it's not just rhythm and blues or rock and roll or soul or whatever. It's everything from jazz, which is American classical, to European classical, right there in a Black community, right? So I have a music biography. I'm also reminded that, oh gosh, I'm really dating myself. This is 50 years ago. I went to a concert with Sun Ra. A lot of people don't know that artist, but Sun Ra. And I'm telling you, this brother blew the entire audience's mind. the man came out of there, a brother that I knew, and I was like, where are you going? He said, I'm going home. I'm walking. I said, you live 40 blocks from me. He said, I can't get in a car after what I've seen. My mind is blown. Because here, 50 years ago, 1970, Sun Ra they called it his intergalactic orchestra, right? They got on costumes, they playing music, they got dancers, they got a video slideshow going. They singing a song about folks walking on the moon because it was right after the 68 moon landing, right? 69 moon landing. So nobody in 1970 thought that that's something that was going anywhere. Today, people won't make music without having all of that visual and technical. So a lot of times we're telling kids don't do X because that's not how it's done. When the most freedom they ought to have, particularly around their souls, around the notion of their emotional and personal learning, really is best expressed through music. A lot of our kids have endured trauma. I'm not just talking about this stuff with this pandemic from the standpoint of they were isolated or they couldn't go to school, but they have seen people die up close. Now, I know I have colleagues who say, well, kids have experienced death before, not without ritual. Not without ritual, we had people die, but then we have a big old funeral. We don't even call it a funeral, it's a homegoing. And it's not even for the dead person, right? Because they dead. It's for all of us to come together, tell them lies about how we're gonna be better. We ain't gonna do this no more, y'all. We're gonna try to, we're gonna patch up. Then we have to have a repass. So this is a cultural shift because here I am in a mostly white community, and I've had white colleagues who have passed on or have had loved ones pass on. Then I go, because I'm a part of the community. But I tell them, I said, listen, y'all, with these cookies and this punch, this ain't getting it. This ain't helping my grief. You don't understand. I need a big old piece of fried chicken to grieve over. I need some macaroni and cheese for my tears to go into. But it's all a part of the ritual that allows me to say goodbye in a particular way. Our kids haven't been able to do this. 7 people in a funeral home, 20 people spaced out in at a graveside, and yet they have to carry that grief and come back in classrooms. It's no surprise that if we did a quick survey, most of you are seeing kids act in all kinds of ways right now. That there's more fighting going on, there's more disruption. All of that is because they are traumatized. And we are not paying attention to that trauma. And one of the bombs, one of the salves for trauma is music. Because when I'm feeling bad, my kids know y'all about to hear some hymns. Some hymns is gonna be playing because she's just feeling that thing. And we are not taking advantage of one of the best ways to help kids deal with their trauma and what they've been through over these past 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It leaves me speechless. Franklin, how can you share a little bit of how you think we make it intentional, embedded, and sustained?
Well, a lot of it comes to also the materials that we use. Like for some of us, and I used to be us, so let me throw myself in there. We see it, it's a song, we teach it. There's no historical background as of why or who wrote the song. And speaking of ritual, what was the ritual of the song? It's a song, we teach it. We may not even connect with the song, may not even like the song, but because it's in that 2nd grade curriculum and you're supposed to teach it in the third week of the 2nd quarter, this is the song that you're supposed to teach, so we teach it. And then there's no connection to the song. Mm-hmm. And so there's no soul in the song. And so the kids are not singing it and it doesn't work, and then all hell breaks loose. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it happens over and over again. So sometimes we have to, as teachers, self-reflect and say, wait a minute, what is this song and how am I going to hook my students with this song? What do I want them to leave with when they leave my classroom? And especially with the SEL component, you can go so much deeper. On YouTube, I have a video with my former students singing Carrie Underwood's Champion featuring Ludacris. One of my colleagues brought the song to me and said, I can't stop singing it. Franklin, will you listen to it? So at the end of the rehearsal, I played the song for the kids. Oh, they got up. I am invincible, unbreakable, unstoppable, unmovable. They knocked me down. I get up again. I am a champion. Okay, I saw all the social proof I needed that, okay, you need to program this song, right? So I could have left it there and just said, hey, we're doing this song. You sound good. You like it. Hoo-hoo. Then I took it a step further and said, what makes you a champion? What makes a person a champion? What are the characteristics of a champion, right? What would you do if someone came to you and they needed you to be a champion for them? How do you show them? What are your actions? How are you a champion in school, right? How are you a champion for your classmates? And so that turns into a full classroom discussion where students begin to share personal things, where we began to really form as a family. We weren't just an ensemble anymore. We were then a family because now I'm trusting you with my story. Right. I'm trusting you with my experience, with my trauma. And so here's a song by Carrie Underwood. It's a country song with a little pop twist with Ludacris adding the hip hop flavor. That it sounds good, it looked good. And if you see the video, it's amazing. But behind that song was the deeper connection, right? Did they learn the melody and learn how to sing it in harmony and learn choreography? Yeah. But then were they able to connect on a deeper level? Right. Absolutely.
And I just want to make a point that, we're not suggesting that we want to limit kids' access to just one or two genres or styles of music. I began using music in the classroom. I don't know why it occurred to me, and I was a history teacher, but I've never been in an environment without music. And in fact, the music informs, I use it to teach history. I used to always have the radio on when I first started teaching. And I remember one morning, I forgot to get up and turn it off because I turned it off before the kids came in, and I had it on and I went to turn it off. And one of the kids said, no, leave that on. I like that song. And I was like, wow, why am I turning the music off all the time? I hauled in a record player, start bringing in my vinyls, asked them to start bringing in stuff. And so we would play all kinds of different music at different times of the day. Now, how I know I was making an impact, one of my kids who you would never assume would like certain kinds of music. When I asked them, I said, well, what do you guys want to hear? We're going to have some time for you to just kind of cool down. What do you want to hear? He said, Ms. Billings, can you play that song, dun, 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 dun. I said, you want to hear Beethoven's Fifth? He said, that's my John. I love that song. So here, if I'm going to wall him off from this kind of music, I'm saying you're not good enough for it, or you're not someone who can be a part of this. I learned a Latin song in fifth grade. I often talk about my fifth grade teacher because she changed my life. She was our school chorus teacher, but if you were in her class, you was in the chorus. I don't care if you couldn't carry a note strapped to your back, you was going to be in that chorus. I realized later on, she wasn't just putting us in the chorus for music. She would take us around the city. We would sing in churches all around, places we would never go on our own. And one of the songs she taught us was Dona Nobis Pacem. And I was singing it once, sitting in church with my husband, who was Catholic. I'm not Catholic. I'm as Baptist. I was Baptist born and Baptist bred. And when I die, I'm going to be Baptist dead, okay? But I'm sitting there with him singing Dona Nobis Pacem. And he says, where did you learn that song? I said, in fifth grade. And it was something about that song, and she told us the background of the song. I went ahead and took Latin as my world language. So you can have an incredible impact on kids by exposing them to all kinds of genres. The point is, don't reject what they bring. It's not just a one-way experience. They are bringing stuff in, and you are bringing things in.
John. That's my John.
That's a Philly thing, I know.
Yeah, John.
I love
John.
I thought it was just a Philly thing. I mean, I thought it was a DC thing because I went to high school in DC, and then I found out that they say it in Philly too.
It's a Philly thing. Yeah. Everybody, other people say joints. Word is
gent.
Some people say gents and some people say joints, but in Philly it's John. John. That's the all-purpose noun.
Yeah, that's funny. More culture. Okay, so you're giving folks a lot of good information. There are some questions that have come in. I want to honor them and honor some of them. We're running almost short of time. We're supposed to stop in 2 minutes, but I don't want to. If the guests can continue on further, we can talk a little bit more if folks have time. That said, one of the questions that came through was just for the both of you. I think this is sort of what are some recommendations on how to connect students. I guess this is for you, Franklin, how to connect your students in your choir class and just how to connect with them more specifically. And I guess part of that gets at the subtext of that singing isn't always something that students feel very confident about.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I've been sharing with a lot of teachers is sometimes we go straight into the teaching practice and the kids don't even know who we are. Who are you? Why did you choose music as a profession? And so what I encourage folks to do is tell your story. What was that moment that changed your life that you decided that you wanted to become a music educator, right? Was it that first grade solo that you did singing at church and everybody stood up and gave you a big round of applause because you hit that note? Was it playing in a fifth grade band and you were happy to play that trumpet, piece? Was it a specific teacher that did something for you? For me, it was Mr. Michael Graham. He was my high school choral music teacher. And I couldn't read a lick of music, but I was singing in the church. And so I went and came and auditioned for him, and he asked me to read some music, and I looked at it, and I'm like, yo, bro, I don't know where to even start. Then he said, well, sing me a song that you love to sing. And I sung Amazing Grace. He took that, and then he welcomed me into his space, but then he showed me Amazing Grace on sheet music. And so he connected the dots for me in places that I had not had. And so what I'm saying is share your story, share your musical experiences. If you have a YouTube channel or if you like to play a recorder, whatever it is, students need to experience your musicianship. We want our students to perform the best, to sing the right note, to clap the rhythms, and then we can't even do it. I've been in some classrooms, I'm like, wait a minute, you asking them to keep the steady beat and you're not even on the steady beat. So we have to practice the things that we're asking our students to complete. And that starts with knowing who you are, knowing your calling. And it's hard. It's really hard. You have to sit and you have to self-reflect and say, wait a minute, why am I teaching? And don't make it about the kids, please. Why are you
I just love the kids, right?
I love them.
I love the kids. I was like, you know what? What do you do with the ones that ain't that lovable? Because I had two of them.
There you go.
In my house. I ain't talking about two. They ain't all that lovable.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Go ahead, Uriel.
I appreciated you brought that point out, that the importance of sharing who you are and where your passion for that work is. And that's one of the things I've experienced too, is that I tell them, every student's not going to be interested in the same way as every other student, but they will respect what you're doing when they see that it's not a joke to you. Mm-hmm. And when they know it, and the way they know it's not a joke to you isn't you talking about they should learn and listen, but rather you showing them what you can do. And that you put energy into it. So I hear what you're saying. I think that's a great point.
So I know we're running out of time, but I want to share with you one of the beauties of the work that I do is I get to see excellent teachers all around the country, in fact, around the world. And I met a young brother who now is in Oakland, but I met him when he was in DC. His name is Karega Bailey, Karega Bailey, Bailey. Karega used to be a teacher in DC, and he used to be actually an administrator in a school for kids who were last resort. Like if you flunk out of this, you done, is essentially what it was. And most of his kids were truant. And he told the principal, he was the dean of students, that's what it was. And he told the principal he would only take the job as dean if he was allowed to teach at least 2 classes. He said, I just can't be the bad guy. I've got to know them, their talents and their abilities. And so he used to teach this class, and the principal then wanted him to try to convince the kids to come to Saturday school. And he's like, these kids don't even come to Monday through Friday, not Saturday. He said, yep, that's part of the job. Get them to come to Saturday school. So he told the kids, he said, look, you're assigned to Saturday school between 9 and 12. He said, at 12:05, I go in the studio. If you want to be in the studio, you better be there at 9 o'clock. And those kids started coming. And I gave you his name because if you go to YouTube, you'll find a video called Fly Away, Karega Bailey, that these kids are performing. He's doing the rap, the hip hop background, but the kids are singing, they are dancing, they are playing. And these are kids that everybody had given up on. But it was his willingness to say, look, come and be a part of this. This is something, because he does have a group. He and his wife have a group. So I think it's really important for us to understand, as you said, Franklin, kids want to know who we are as people, not just as the teacher assigned to this class. What did you do? How did you make it? You look like me in some ways, but you look like you have a very different life. How did that happen?
And when they see a picture of you as a kid, mm-hmm. It's like, oh my, that's you, Mr. Willis? Oh my God. And it builds their relatability. And they see that, hey, I grew up just like you. Like, I have some experiences that are similar to yours. Mm-hmm. And it humanizes us. We're not just so sacred and all-knowing and all, no. And so it's taking that and putting it on its head. Mm-hmm. And so if you start off your classroom with that, and of course, you're always going to have 1 or 2 that's just going to try you, mm-hmm. just to try you. That's just part of the game. And those are the ones that you just keep on going. And they'll be the ones that
those are the ones who get my big mama treatment. In other words, they get hugged real tight. Their cheeks get pinched. Uh-huh. It's like, I am not pushing you away. You're getting drawn in even more. Mm-hmm. And I love the late Marva Collins used to say to kids, there's nothing you can do to make me not teach you. Mm. So just get over it,
Thank you so much. I have to say, I hope people are appreciating that, we've had some of these, we often have discussions around social and emotional learning that are very technical and about these concepts and various definitions, but to just focus in on human connection, student voice, giving the big mama treatment and hugging students and making sure they understand that there's nothing they can do to make us not teach them is the essence of what social and emotional learning is really supposed to be about. And I think as a result, our work as music educators. I want to thank you both, Franklin Willis and Gloria Ladson-Billings, for being here, blessing us not just with your ideas and wisdom, but also with your souls and spirits. I think that's been felt by everybody. Maybe you'll come back. But we're going to stay in touch. If you have ways folks can connect and get information, by all means, share it. And I'll throw it back to Rebecca and just issue another hearty thank you. It was my pleasure to be here with you having this discussion. I really appreciate it and value.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Urel, Gloria, and Franklin for, my goodness, a wonderful discussion and sharing your stories and your expertise. And thank you so much for your overtime today. And this concludes our webinar for tonight. Thank you again to the KKR COVID Response Fund for their generous support of this series. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Good night.